ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। मुखं करोति वाचालं लङ्घयते गिरिन्द्रकृपातमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं दीनतारिणं श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम् पंचकल्पतरुर्यश्चकृपासिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठकुले श्रीमति भक्तिसिद्धान्त सरस्वती नमः। श्रीवार्षभानवी देवी दयिताय कृपक्तये कृष्णसम्बन्धव्याप्ताय प्रभवे नमः। Guryochalapremaka Shri Bhaktisiddhanta Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigraya Namaste Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtari Natharine Bhanuga Viruddhapa Siddhanta Bhaktisiddhanta.
Going to the mic, it's not coming.
Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
But it's all about that. I mean, if I ask them and they don't respond, I don't know what that means. Somebody give me a signal as to whether you can hear me adequately now.
Can you hear it, Mara?
Someone should tell me what to do.
Well, you just continue. We will come.
I can't hear.
I think we should
Oh, I'm sorry. I need to adjust my thingies. So I should just go.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot my water bottle. Could someone bring me water, please? And not full of tulsi leaves, because gagging on them in front of the camera is really awkward. So as you all are aware, today is the anniversary of the appearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada's beloved spiritual master. And I thought the best way to glorify him would be to share some things from his disciples, primarily Srila Prabhupada, but there are some other things too that give some insights into the focus of his life. So I want to start with the offerings that Srila Prabhupada made to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur on his appearance day in Bombay, Mumbai, in 1936. He wrote a poem with which we're familiar, and he gave an address. Thank you. And he made an address on behalf of the members of the Bombay Gaudiya Math, apparently in front of devotees and guests, and this is something that's very dear to the devotees as well. But he wrote a poem. He wrote an English ashtakam, 8 verses, expressing his appreciation for the mercy of his spiritual master. We know this one. Adore ye all the happy day, Blessed in heaven, sweeter than May, when he appeared at Puri, the holy place, my Lord and Master, his divine grace. O my Master, the evangelic angel, give us thy light, light up thy candle. Struggle for existence, a human race, the only hope, his divine grace. No, I think they need it open. I just need to adjust my noise filter thing. Thank you. Misled we are, all going astray. Save us, Lord, our fervent pray. Wonder thy ways to turn our face. Adore thy feet, your divine grace. Forgotten Krishna, we fallen souls pain most heavy, the illusions toll. Darkness all around, all untraced. The only hope is divine grace. Message of service thou hast brought. A healthful life is Chaitanya wrought. Unknown to all, it's full of grace. That's your gift, your divine grace. Absolute ascension thou hast proved, in personal calamity thou hast moved. This gives us a life, anew and fresh. Worship thy feet, your divine grace. Had you not come who had told the message of Krishna forceful and bold, that's your right, you have the mace. Save me, follow your divine grace. The line of service is drawn by you is pleasing and healthy like morning dew, but the oldest of all, but in new dress, miracle done, your divine grace. So we know that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati appreciated this poem well enough that he instructed that it be published in Harness, which it was. And he particularly liked this sixth stanza. Absolute is sentient, thou hast proved, in personal calamity thou hast moved. He liked that couplet especially. But I think also that it's notable for us, the last one, the line of service is drawn by you is pleasing and healthy like morning dew, the oldest of all that in new dress. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur introduced actually, in a sense, some things to Gaudiya Vaishnavism which hadn't been seen before, including an institution for systematically propagating Lord Chaitanya's teachings. Up to that point, it was largely the teachings of Bhakti Yoga as presented by Lord Chaitanya were largely decentralized, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all. But they were also kind of local, mostly for village people and mostly under the control of, for the most part, apparently under the control of kind of like family traditions. It had become a family business, initiation and that kind of thing. So we had the Jatiko side, which Srila Bhakti Thakur and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur didn't feel was the proper presentation of Krishna consciousness. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur rejuvenated the presentation of Bhakti Yoga, of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And Srila Prabhupada did the same, and his disciples are also doing the same. I have one godbrother who sometimes would compare ISKCON to a franchise like Baskin, or a business like Baskin Robbins, where you have all these franchises. I don't know whether they're stores or owned by the company or how many of them were franchises or what. But he says, you know, any Baskin Robbins you go into, the decor is going to be pretty much the same. It's going to be the same ice cream, etc. But that's never been my experience at ISKCON temples, and I'm not someone who's been to a bazillion temples. I'm a kind of a provincial guy. Spent a lot of my time here, a lot of time in California, but it's like I hadn't been to a lot of temples in different parts of the world. But what I've seen was that although the same ice cream is there, the decor, the music, and all that, sometimes quite different. For example, here in Hawaii in the early 70s, some people may not be aware of this, because here we are in the middle of the ocean. But our kirtans in the evenings were quite different from anywhere else. You didn't go to New York or Los Angeles and find the kirtan accompanied by electric guitars and an electric bass. But in Honolulu, it was like that in the evenings. And it was like that in the evenings when Srila Prabhupada came in 1972. He was here for a couple of weeks. And every evening when he came, we had electric guitar accompanied kirtans. Srila Prabhupada didn't say a word. If Prabhupada had said anything, it would have stopped. Because he was here. You know, if he'd come the next night, then it would have been, if he'd said none of this nonsense, and then he had to experience again the next night, there would have been heck to pay, I guess. Because I tell you one thing he did comment on. Well, that's interesting. One thing he did comment on was sikas. A lot of us had big sikas. Gaur-Sundar had a great big sika that was long and kind of draped down over his shoulder. Shyam Sundar, who was traveling with Srila Prabhupada, had a big sika, and if you know Shyam Sundar, he's got thick curly hair. So he had this big sika that was just like kind of all over the place. And Srila Prabhupada instructed that they be cut down to the size, I think it was no larger than $50, and tied in a slip knot. And they were immediately. Shyam Sundars, Gaur-Sundars, and all the rest of us. So, anyway, old medicine in new bottles, as Srila Prabhupada sometimes said. And then there's the address that Srila Prabhupada gave, as far as I understand, the same day at the Mutt. And it's interesting to note that Srila Prabhupada was instrumental in starting that Mutt. He was doing business, and spending a lot of his time in Mumbai doing business, and he was instrumental to starting the Mutt. He would go around door to door preaching with Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Goswami Maharaj. And Bhakti Saranga Goswami Maharaj would make an introduction, and they would go to someplace, someone's home or office. Goswami Maharaj would make the introduction. Srila Sridhar Maharaj would speak some philosophy, and Srila Prabhupada would close the deal, get the donation. And so he was quite instrumental, and there were some suggestions that because of that, and because he was quite competent in many ways, including his understanding of the philosophy, that he should be the head of the Mutt. So they suggested that to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur. He said, no, it's not necessary. In the future, he'll do what needs to be done. So Prabhupada noted that. So here's his address, 1936. Sakshat Garitvena Samasta Shastraya Luktastata Bharyata Eva Shakti Kintu Prabhorya Priya Eva Tasya Mandevaro Shri Charanara Vrindam. In the revealed scriptures, it is declared that the spiritual master should be worshipped like the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and this injunction is obeyed by pure devotees. The spiritual master is the most confidential servant of the Lord. Thus, let us offer our respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of our spiritual master. Gentlemen, on behalf of the members of the Bombay branch of the Gaudiya month, let me welcome you all because you have so kindly joined us tonight in our congregational offerings of homage to the lotus feet of the world teacher, Acharya Dev, who is the founder of this Gaudiya mission and the president Acharya of Sri Sri Vishwa Vaishnava Raj Sabha. I mean my eternal master, Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Sri Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Goswami Maharaj. 62 years ago on this auspicious day, the Acharya Dev made his appearance by the call of Thakur Bhaktivinoda at Sri Chaitra Jagannath Dham at Puri. Gentlemen, the offering of such an homage as has been arranged this evening to the Acharya Dev is not a sectarian concern. For when we speak of the fundamental principle of Gurudev or Acharya Dev, we speak of something that is of universal application. There does not arise any question of discriminating my guru from yours or anyone else's. There is only one guru who appears in an infinity of forms to teach you, me, and all others. In the Mundaka Upanishad, it is said, Tad Vijnanartam Sagarume Vikachet Samitani Shrotriyam Brahmanishtam. In order to learn the transcendental science, one must approach the bona fide spiritual master in disciplic succession, who is fixed in the absolute truth. Thus, it has been enjoined herewith that in order to receive that transcendental knowledge, one must approach the Guru. Therefore, if the absolute truth is one, about which we think there is no difference of opinion, the Guru cannot be two. The Acharya Dev to whom we have assembled tonight to offer our humble homage is not the Guru of a sectarian institution, or one out of many differing exponents of the truth. On the contrary, he is the Jagat Guru, or the Guru of all of us. The only difference is that some obey him wholeheartedly, while others do not obey him directly. In the Bhagavatam it is said, Acharya mam vijaniyam navamanyita karpachet namartya bhutyasiyeta sarvadeva mayo guru. One should understand the spiritual master to be as good as I am. Nobody should be jealous of the spiritual master or think of him as an ordinary man, because the spiritual master is the sum total of all demigods. That is, the Acharya has been identified with God himself. He has nothing to do with the affairs of this mundane world. He appears before us to reveal the light of the Vedas and to bestow on us the blessing of full-fledged freedom, after which we should hanker at every step of our life's journey. The transcendental knowledge of the Vedas was first uttered by God to Brahma, the creator of this particular universe. From Brahma, the knowledge descended to Narada, from Narada to Vyasadeva, from Vyasadeva to Madhva, and in this process of disciplic succession, the transcendental knowledge was transmitted by one disciple to another, till it reached Lord Gauranga, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, who posed as the disciple and the successor of Sri Ishwar Puri. The present Acharya Dev is the 10th disciplic representative from Sri Rupa Goswami, the original representative of Sri Chaitanya, who preached this transcendental tradition in its fullness. The knowledge that we receive from our Guru Dev is not different from that imparted by God himself and the succession of the Acharyas in the preceptorial line of Brahma. We adore this auspicious day as Sri Vyasa Puja Tithi because the Acharya is the living representative of Vyasadeva, the divine compiler of the Vedas, Puranas, Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, and Srimad Bhagavatam. We cannot know anything of the transcendental region by our limited, perverted method of observation and experiment. But all of us can lend our eager ears for the aural reception of the transcendental sound transmitted from that region to this through the unadulterated medium of Gurudev or Sri Vyasadeva. Pardon me. Therefore, gentlemen, we should surrender ourselves today at the feet of the representative of Sri Vyasadeva for the elimination of all our differences bred by our unsubmissive attitude. It is accordingly said in the Bhagavad Gita, Tat vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tat pradarshana. Just approach the wise and bona fide spiritual master. Surrender unto him first and try to understand him by inquiries and service. Such a wise spiritual master will enlighten you with transcendental knowledge, for he has already known the absolute truth. To receive transcendental knowledge, we must completely surrender ourselves to the real Acharya in a spirit of ardent inquiry and service. Interesting. The other night, in our Nectar Devotion Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu discussion, one of the devotees who participates regularly asked about how much we should surrender to a devotee who may not be as qualified. I was talking about Prabhupada's disciples in particular, in light of the difficulties that we had over the last 45 years or so. And I said, I don't know that there's any wiggle room. In order to receive transcendental knowledge, we must completely surrender ourselves to the real Acharya. So a big part of the deal is to be very careful about who we submit ourselves to for initiation. It shouldn't be done out of because of social or institutional pressure. Srila Jiva Goswami actually enjoins against that. Said that the spiritual master shouldn't be accepted based on social or ecclesiastical conventions. But there should be, we should surrender ourselves to someone who actually draws out our faith in the absolute truth. So this is like getting married. You don't just get married at somebody because she bats her eyes at you. Well, we do. And you see the result. Even among the devotees, we have this horrendous divorce rate. So this is a really serious commitment, and for maybe 40 years or more, I've compared it to marriage, that it should be something, it's a relationship that should be entered into as carefully as marriage. So there have been a few devotees who've asked me about initiation, and I usually see if I can scare them away. For the most part, I've been successful. The others I've managed to put off. Because there are all these hoops you have to jump through. And actually, you've got to become qualified to do that. I know myself pretty well. To receive transcendental knowledge, we must completely surrender ourselves to the real Acharya in a spirit of ardent inquiry and service. Actual performance of service to the Absolute under guidance of the Acharya is the only vehicle by which we can assimilate transcendental knowledge. Today's meeting for offering our humble services and homage to the feet of the Acharya Dev will enable us to be favored with the capacity of assimilating transcendental knowledge so kindly transmitted by him to all persons without distinction. Spiritual Master is also the representative of Nityananda Prabhu, who disseminated spiritual knowledge without any discrimination. Lord Chaitanya was a little more discriminating in his association than Nityananda Prabhu. Gentlemen, although it is imperfectly that we have been enabled by his grace to understand the sublime messages of our Acharya Dev, we must admit that we have realized definitely that the divine message from his holy lips is the congenial thing for suffering humanity. All of us should hear him patiently. If we listen to the transcendental sound without unnecessary opposition, he will surely have mercy upon us. The Acharya's message is to take us back to our original home, back to God. Let me repeat, therefore, that we should hear him patiently, follow him in the measure of our conviction, and bow down at his lotus feet for releasing us from our present causeless unwillingness for serving the Absolute and all souls. Sitting at the feet of the Acharya Dev, let us try to understand from this transcendental source of knowledge what we are, what is this universe, what is God, what is our relationship with him. The message of Sri Chaitanya is the message for the living entities and the message of the living world. He did not bother himself for the upliftment of this dead world, which is suitably named Martyaloka, the world where everything is destined to die. He appeared before us 450 years ago to tell us something of the transcendental universe, where everything is permanent and everything is for the service of the Absolute. But recently Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has been misrepresented by some unscrupulous persons, and the highest philosophy of the Lord has been misinterpreted to be the cult of the lowest type of society. We are glad to announce tonight that our Acharya Dev, with his usual kindness, saved us from this horrible type of degradation, and therefore we bow down at his lotus feet with all humility. We are happy that we have been relieved of this horrible type of malady by the mercy of his divine grace. He is our eye-opener, our eternal Father, our eternal preceptor, and our eternal
Jai Shri Bhaktisiddhanta ki.
Let us therefore bow down at his lotus feet on this auspicious day. Gentlemen, although we are like ignorant children in the knowledge of transcendence, still my Guru Dev has kindled a small fire within us to dissipate the invincible darkness of empirical knowledge. We are now so much on the safe side that no amount of philosophical argument by the empiric schools of thought can deviate us an inch from the position of our eternal dependence on the lotus feet of his divine grace. Gentlemen, had he not appeared before us to deliver us from the thraldom of this gross worldly delusion, surely we would have remained for lives and ages in the darkness of helpless captivity. Had he not appeared before us, we would not have been able to understand the eternal truth of the sublime teaching of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Personally, I have no hope for any direct service of the coming crores of births in the sojourn of my life. But I am confident that someday or other I shall be delivered from this mire of delusion in which I am at present so deeply sunk. Therefore, let me with all my earnestness pray at the lotus feet of my divine Master to allow me to suffer the lot for which I am destined due to my past misdoings, but to let me have this power of realization that I am nothing but a tiny servant of the Almighty Absolute Godhead, realized through the unflinching mercy of my divine Master. Let me therefore bow down at his lotus feet with all the humility at my command. Abhay Charan Das. I also wanted to share something that Srila Prabhupada's godbrother shared. One is, this was Nayanananda Das Babaji, one of his godbrothers, younger godbrother, who was interviewed by my friend Mula Prakriti in 1999. And this was for her book, Our Srila Prabhupada, A Friend to All, which was her conversations, a record of her conversations with folks who knew Srila Prabhupada, had some association with Srila Prabhupada before August of 1965, before he left to come here. And one of my godbrothers, when he heard I was working on this, kind of shrugged his shoulders and says, "Oh yeah, it's all these people all of a sudden trying to get on, latch on to Prabhupada's coattails or something to get a little notoriety." However, this devotee changed his tune after he read these different interviews. And I had the honor and pleasure of being part of the team editing this book for Mula Prakriti just before she left our company. And there are a couple of things that Nayanananda Das Babaji shared that I thought were particularly charming and tell us something about the character of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, as well as a little bit about our Srila Prabhupada. So he had spent a little time talking about how he knew Srila Prabhupada. They had a lot of association over the years, and sometimes the devotees would be out late preaching at a preaching program. Nayananda Das Babaji mostly lived at Champahati out in Gautamandala, but because that's where his family is from, and he was helping to maintain a Gaudiya Math center there. But they would often go into Kolkata for preaching, and when they did, of course it's several hours to get back out, even especially then, you can imagine, to get back out to Mayapur. So they would need a place to camp out in Kolkata, so they would go to Abhay Babu's house. And so they would, even without warning, they would knock on his door late at night, he would invite them in, he'd put them up, often he would give them his own room and he'd sleep out in the living room. And then in the morning, he would cook for them and feed them prasad. So he says, I distinctly recall some very special occasions involving Abhay Charanaravinda Prabhu and our Gurudev. The first occurred at Sri Chaitanya Math in Sri Dham, Mayapur. Our Gurudev used to pace along the balcony of his quarters upstairs. One day I was visiting while he was pacing there, surrounded by a crowd of top sannyasis and brahmacharis. Then I saw that Abhay Charanaravinda Prabhu had come on a visit from Kolkata and was walking up the stairs. Somehow our Gurudev immediately noticed him coming, and as he was walking there by his doorway, he motioned for Prabhu to come near him. Prabhu approached him slowly and humbly, and Gurudev greeted him warmly and affectionately, and then opened his door and beckoned Prabhu to come inside alone with him. They remained inside for some time. All the other devotees were amazed that Gurudev showed this preference to a grihastha in white cloth, living outside the month. Everyone was discussing this. I especially noticed how beautiful and effulgent he was looking when he came out of Gurudev's room. The last year that our Gurudev organized and performed Gautamandala Parikrama, thousands and thousands of pilgrims assembled at our Champahati Mandir. There was a whole village of tents in all directions. On the afternoon of the last day, one of our godbrothers had just arrived in Navadvip, having returned from London by boat. He had gone to preach, but had returned without meeting with full success. In the evening, while Guru Maharaj was giving pravachan, he explained that it was his earnest desire that the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu should be spread in the Western countries. He told how it was the vision of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur that this would happen, and it was also the last request of his mother, Srimati Bhagavati Devi, to him before she left this world. You can imagine the impact, the last request of a Bengali mother on her son. Consequently, he had been willing to take the lifeblood of the Gaudiya Math in funds to send to the devotees there to preach. But so far, these attempts have been largely unsuccessful. At this moment in his talk, I noticed that something very mysterious was happening. Guru Maharaj was looking out at the large crowd of devotees, especially in front of where all the sannyasis and brahmacharis in red cloth were. Then he turned his head and looked over to the left side where I was standing. He was looking intently at someone and became silent for a long moment. I happened to look behind me, and I clearly saw that the person with whom he was making eye contact was Abhay Charanaravinda Prabhu. I thought that they were looking at each other in a special way. Then Guru Maharaj again addressed the audience in front of him and said, "But I have a prediction. However long in the future it may be, I predicted one of my disciples will cross the ocean, and that devotee will bring back the whole world." I remembered this incident, and Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj truly made it come to pass exactly in this way. Times after there was one thing I wanted to share was a song written by Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami, who was an excellent Sanskrit poet. And that has been sung for decades in all the Gaudiya Maths. And at one point, Srila Prabhupada instructed that we should sing this song in our temples as well. But that's something that was never followed up on. As far as I can tell, he never followed up on it. But there was also a discussion of his poem, his Ashtakam, his English Ashtakam to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, that he gave in 1976 in Hyderabad, but we're out of time. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things. We probably have all heard a number of the talks that Srila Prabhupada gave on the occasion of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's appearance and disappearance. There's a couple of particularly famous disappearance talks, one of which being in LA in 1969, which was quite wonderful, and another in December of 1973, which I had the good fortune of attending. By the arrangement of fate, my intention at that time was to have been in South America, but things didn't work out like that. So I happened to be in LA at that time. And Srila Prabhupada gave a very wonderful talk. If you have an opportunity to listen to it, if you want to, read the transcript, but even better, I'd say, listen to it, because at the end, you'll find it very striking. You find Srila Prabhupada's mood very striking. But Srila Prabhupada didn't constantly talk about his spiritual master. You didn't hear in every lecture him talking about, I am the foremost disciple of my great spiritual master as Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He wasn't going around shouting, trying to shout more loudly, Jai Prabhupada, more loudly than anyone else. But he did by his action. And by the mood that he brought to that service. And we saw that particularly at at the end of his talk on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur's disappearance in 1973, there were probably 200 and some odd devotees in the temple room that day. Quite an amazing festival. We had at the time the temple room was in the space, I guess, where the Fate Museum is now. I assume it's still there. I don't know much about the New Dwarka temple right now. But, and where the temple room is now was what we refer to as the sanctuary. And out there, at that time, there was a kind of a great big Vyasasana. And you know, while I was there in 1973, we didn't really use the sanctuary much. Devotees would go out there and chant or read or something like that, or talk Harikatha. But it wasn't used so much for like gatherings or functions. It had been previously, I guess, while they were putting together the temple room where it was at the time. But there was this big Vyasasana out there, and what Srila Prabhupada asked them to move his Vyasasana, bring in this big Vyasasana, and to bring down this large portrait he had in his room, in the office part of his quarters upstairs, portrait of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, and place that portrait on the Vyasasana. And Srila Prabhupada offered arati to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur. And devotees, all devotees from the community, made food preparations to offer to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. There were probably 100 and some odd different preparations offered to him on that occasion. And Srila Prabhupada gave this very powerful talk. And at the very end of the talk, after having, you could hear the tears welling up. You could see him and hear him starting to choke up, and he checked it twice toward the end. And then right at the very end, he said something to the effect that you have all been sent to me by my spiritual master to help me carry out his instructions, and I want to thank you very much. And at that point, he was unable to check his emotions, and they overflowed. He became unable to speak, and tears were streaming down his eyes. And right then, everybody in the temple room hit the deck. And he had everyone's heart in the palm of his hand. So deep was his commitment to the service of the instruction of his spiritual master, that his vision was that we were, I don't know, maybe associates of Srila Saraswati Thakur or somehow or other, sent by him to help Srila Prabhupada carry out this impossible mission that he felt he had been given. So he didn't go around, Jai Prabhupada, trying to do that more loudly than anyone else, but he did it practically by right on the verge of his 70th birthday, doing what everyone told him was just nuts, and getting on a freighter and crossing several oceans to go to New York City, a place that he had no experience of, he had no knowledge of, and spreading Krishna consciousness, all in the instruction of His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur Prabhupada. Okay, we can stop there. It's plenty late. Thank you so much for your attention.